Hello. The music stopped. That means I am live. So thank you, Gail, for inviting me. Alternative venues for jazz. I've been watching. It's really been so helpful during this really, really difficult time that we're all living through. Yeah, I made some notes so I won't get too far off topic. First question here I ask myself is, how did I get into jazz? That's a great question, especially because I'm one of maybe 3 or 4 professors at Florida A&M University teaching jazz right now, teaching jazz history. Of course, Robert Griffin is the head of jazz at FAMU, but we have several teachers teaching it, and I'm one of them. I don't remember a time in my life when I was not into jazz. So I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm from the Bronx, born in the Bronx, and I'm a child of that time of segregation where I'm the quintessential little brother. My big brother, my parents sent him back to New York, to the Bronx to go to high school. And I was in Tallahassee, the kid who would racially desegregate a lot of the programs and schools and stuff like that. But the music of our community was always rich with jazz. So I was robbing my mother and father's collection with their records. My dad was a big fan of Louis Armstrong, Nat Cole, Ray Charles. And keep in mind, this is at a time when Black performers were in the South, they weren't staying in hotels. They were staying with private families, like Lawyer Smith, a great musician in town there. A lot of the musicians stayed at his house. So, and my brother being in New York, when I would visit, I would have access to his record collection, and I would steal his records. Records like Yusef Lateef's records, Thelonious Monk, Dinah Washington, Billy Eckstine, Arthur Prysock. Those were just records on rotation in my brother's collection, living with our grandparents in the Bronx. So when I would visit, I would raid his collection and feel super hip because I saw what was going on in New York, and then back home in Tallahassee, getting that other aspect of experience. So there was never a time when I was not into jazz. Learning instruments as a kid, we were exposed in that racially segregated world. We were exposed to good teachers. We didn't have a choice. They taught us in spite of the divide. So early on, I was going to various piano teachers, and it wasn't working out so great for me as a little kid in single digits, And my parents suggested a woman by the name of Johnny Lee. They said, you need to go to Mrs. Lee. She teaches theory. And she said, Nat and Cannonball studied with her. So they were from the same community. They went to Florida A&M University. We were in the same church, St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church. Like a lot of Southern Black people, they called the church by the leader's name. That was Father Brooks' church, But it was St. Michael and All Angels. And the Adderley family was very active in that church, as was the Tookes family. So my parents said, listen, why don't you try theory as opposed to, just straight piano lessons, since you're not really liking it. And that's another conversation, I think, for another time. But I did have early piano lessons that, I did fairly well in it. But I heard the big girls, and they sounded really good. Remind you, I'm just a kid in single digits at that time, trying to be a tough little boy. But theory worked out really well for me. So it's, learning modes and not just an academic thing, though my parents greatly believe in education. Now looking back, I realized I was just hearing modalities that would inform my harmonic structures throughout my life, the way I think about things, the way I accept things. And that came largely from those ongoing lessons with Mrs. Lee. I'm really grateful for that. We often compare her, and I think rightfully so, to Nadia Boulanger. So many great composers went to Paris and studied with her. And in our all-Black world, we went to Mississippi, and we're all the better for it. I can tell you that. So I never had a time in my life when exposure to what we can call jazz was unfamiliar. In fact, Nancy Wilson herself with Cannonball and that practiced right there on our campus frequently, when I was just a little kid. That was an exposure. So I'm lucky in that way. When I think about the first jazz musician I remember ever hearing, and these are guideline questions, I know, I'm not stuck to them, but they're good questions, so I want to try to stay on target with them. It might very well have been Louis Armstrong, because my father was such a fan of his, or it might have been Dinah Washington, because my mom was such a fan of hers, or it might have been Ella Fitzgerald, because my mother's sister in New York was such a fan of hers. And fortunately for me, my parents on that side of the family, my maternal side, they were New Yorkers, and my mother had grown up really with those people. She knew Ella Fitzgerald. You see, my aunt had known Billie Holiday. It wasn't something way far off. When I would ask my mom about Billie Holiday, she said, "Well, you had to be there. You had to understand how she spoke to us." That was always important. People having their own identity in the music. So, though I've struggled to try to think of the first jazz record or artist I might have ever heard, it would probably be impossible. But this I can tell you. Every Sunday night, the Ed Sullivan Show would come on, and we would wait around. We finally got a television. We would wait around a little black and white TV and wait to see who was going to be on it. And nothing made us more proud than when the black artists would be performing. So I can remember like yesterday seeing Errol Garner play the piano. And that had to be one of the most influential moments in my young life, still probably in single digits, seeing him play and how fascinated I was by him. We also saw Duke Ellington on a regular basis on those shows, and he was so elegant and so engaging. And we saw Count Basie's orchestra, and Count Basie just was fascinating to me. So those early experiences I recall very clearly, like they were yesterday. And I knew I wanted to be a part of all of that. When Cannonball and Nat had the big record, Mercy, Mercy, obviously, a song written by Joe Zawinul. So they came to Tallahassee and performed in Lee Hall Auditorium. Now, interestingly, they didn't come and perform as often as one would think. But they did come when that record was an international hit on every chart, Grammy-winning record. And it was at that hall where I touched a Fender Rhodes piano for the first time. Joe Zawinul let me play his instrument just, during a sound check or something like that. And I remember Nat saying, "Boy, I can't believe you've grown so much. Man, you've gotten so tall." Because even though now, I've got white hair and I'm a big, tall guy, been around a long time, I used to be the kid. I was the youngest kid of the youngest kid of the youngest kid. Both my parents were the youngest kids, as were their parents. So I played that role very naturally and very well. I soaked up a lot of information in that capacity. But in any event, when the Cannonball Adderley Quintet came to Tallahassee and performed during that time period, it was transformative for me. I saw somebody of our own, someone who had their own language. I don't think everyone was calling Cannonball yet the country preacher, but if you think about it, even that record, there's a recitative at the beginning of it when he's just talking about people in adversity. I've heard so many of his recordings where he's talking to people. He did it well, and he certainly enjoyed it. So all those are really transformative in terms of opening my ears. I have this theory that children actually, our ears are open, and some things happen in life and closes them. When my children, my wife and I have 4 children. They're adults now, obviously, but when they were little, I would play different things on the piano for them, and and then say, no, just remember that. And then I would ask them to reiterate later. And I would always find that they would stick to the key. And I'm not trying to say Tookes children have perfect pitch. What I'm trying to say is I believe that human beings may be more receptive to vibrations than we think we are as we get older, and this part of our brain starts taking over from that part of the brain. I think instinct is there. So I was always open to that, soaking it all up. And it was a good thing. Now, talking about buying my first record, which is point number 1B on here, I think is really, really important. So there was a path, like I've been astonished how many pianists were like me who were taken by Errol Garner. There's just something about him, you know? And that path led me through various fine piano players. My mom played piano great and sang great, as did her mom and her sister. But in terms of professional people who were out there and well known, one day in my brother's collection, I stumbled upon an Oscar Peterson record. At this time, I didn't know Oscar Peterson's work. And it just took my breath away. I said, that's it right there. That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. There's a little noise here. Can we get that noise down, please? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so sorry about that, everyone. So, yeah, when I go back to that day when I discovered this Oscar Peterson record, I don't remember the name of the album right now, but there he was, in all of his glory, a great picture of him, and I'm listening to this man play, and I said, that's wonderful. And I started chasing that. And of course, I reached the point where I said, I can't get there, but I surely was chasing it with all my might and studying like a beast for it. And I still felt hopeful, because I was hearing other piano voices that I knew I couldn't chase, but they were certainly inspiring me. McCoy Tyner during that time as well. It's like, oh my goodness, what is that all about? And like so many kids of my generation, I was definitely struck in a strong way by hearing Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and so many others. Yet and still, I was just trying to find my way as a pianist, as a singer. And that's the simplest story I can get to, but it's a jazz story as well, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I'm trying to get to, follow Oscar Peterson, knowing that I can't get there. But I'm okay. I'm having a happy life. I'm a teenage boy, with these books and reading and everything. And I go to a record store, and one day I'm there at this record store, and I hear something. And I don't know what it is, but I've never heard anything quite like it before. I'm about to buy a Jimi Hendrix record. I can remember that. In those days, the record stores were also head shops. So you could buy your posters and your paraphernalia and your incense and whatever else you're buying, and you could get your records at the same time. They would let you hear records. And somebody was playing a record that I had never heard in my life. And at that little age, whatever I was, maybe 14-ish or something, I heard over the speakers in that room, Keith Jarrett, Facing You. And it just was transformative for me. I said, wait a minute. It's possible to do what people tell you have to do. They tell you have to get beyond Tatum, which is impossible. You can't play any instrument or voice and get beyond Tatum, but you can if you're real and you have a story to tell. And your story is your story to tell. And hearing that, which of course led me to listening to the Cologne concert, to this day, I think that record might be the largest selling solo instrumental jazz record ever. And so many strange things had to happen for that record to get made. In any event, hearing that was witness to me that you can get beyond Art Tatum. You can get beyond these people, because you have a story to tell. And if it's authentic and if you're working really hard on it, then there's no reason why you can't accomplish something that someone might be interested in. And certainly you'll find it fulfilling. It allowed me to go back into practice and take it seriously again. So I can say that Facing You, if you consider that a jazz record, might have been the first record that I bought with my own money at that time in my little early teenage years or something. And then I was off to the races, I bought everything because it was an exciting time. That's the same time period that Bitches Brew came out and Chameleon. So much was happening in the fusion world that, the lines were now blurred between the pure, what we call more pure traditional jazz forms. And, who am I or anyone to be so arrogant that we are, exclusive of allowing this art form to develop. As I said, for me, I've been talking mainly about the journey, finding my way through piano, but I should really tell you that I'm really defined by the story of watching and being closely related to, in a very intimate way, as a fan, as a friend, as a coworker, a little bit, not enough, but somebody whose radar I was on and who was always on my radar was Nancy Wilson. So when I watch her career, like Cannonball, who helped to put her in another atmosphere with the music. When I watch her career as a singer and how often she was misunderstood, if she was doing a show tune, if she was doing this or that, I said, well, Cannonball did Fiddler on the Roof, for crying out loud. But once again, when I watch her finding her voice, obviously tremendously influenced by Dinah Washington, yet finding a way to relate her story in those songs. It's really compelling. I use several of her pieces in my teaching methodology. And when I get to the last thing that I show the kids is the tribute that Quincy Jones produced with these fine singers on it in tribute to Ella Fitzgerald. And I've never been able to contain my tears when I see Nancy pay tribute to Ella and the way she does it. It's really moving. It's so real and so authentic. And then, she's doing a Gershwin song. It's not like she's doing something we haven't heard before, but it's so genuine. And when in that methodology of teaching, I use that same approach if I'm showing John Coltrane or Charlie Parker or anybody. These people are trying to communicate with the souls of mankind. It's even there on the gravesite of Cannonball Adderley, whose grave and his brother's grave and his parents' grave is right by my mom and dad, my grandmother, and where I will be interred, hopefully later than sooner. In terms of current projects that I'm working on, I've got several that are really cool. I'm going to save one for the end, but I'll say right now one thing that's well, if I haven't said this already, my position at Florida A&M University is I'm the director of music industry studies, and it's a rich opportunity to take these young talents and to utilize my leadership and my experiences as a way to help them to shape their identities and just to find sustainability in their careers. So one project that I'm doing in that light, yes, thank you very much. I wasn't looking over at the comments. I should. I had it in a big view. I couldn't see that. Now I'll be there. Okay, so in that light, one thing that came early in my time in New York, I met a couple of really fine musicians who passed away recently. Onaje Allen Gums, a really fine pianist and arranger. He lived in the Bronx, right there in Co-op City, near where I lived, and we got to know each other. And he invited me to work on some projects that he was working on, and that led to me working on a Buster Williams record right out of college, and working on a Carmen McRae record right out of college. So it gave my parents, especially my mother, gave them a sense that, okay, well, this guy's feet, they're on the ground and he's going in the right direction. So all that was really, really cool. Yeah, I brought that up to say I did a record with as a sideman with George Benson early in the late 70s, and fast forward, I did quite a few records with George and became friends with George, and one of his producers, Charles Wallard, also produced Cuba Gooding and The Maid Ingredient. And through that relationship, after Cuba passed away, I sang at the his service, which was at the Apollo Theater, and it was a comedy of errors. I was supposed to sing to a track, which I really hate to do. And the track failed, and the Apollo audience was getting a little bit uncomfortable. And I wound up going to the piano, and I sang one of his songs, and it went over really well, which led to the family, the Gooding family, asking me to reimagine some of the songs from that catalog. And so that's a project that I find exciting, rearranging some of those songs. Once again, when Cuba joined the Main Ingredient, that was during that time, that in the late 60s. Stevie Wonder wrote some of those songs. It was a very fertile time. It is hard to really delineate genre the way we do right now. It was just music in the golden age of things happening. The civil rights movement, all of that was a part of it. So one project that I'm doing now is reimagining some of the songs from that catalog, and I will get to my other projects in a moment. In terms of advice that I've received from older musicians, that's a perfect question, because none of us would be here without somebody recognizing something about us. And in my case, I was very fortunate because my mom had all the skills, really fine pianist and singer. She taught me the songbook, the Great American Songbook, when I was a kid. But see, her mother had been a Broadway star in an all-Black play that won the Pulitzer Prize called The Green Pastures. And it led to my grandmother signing with Jack Warner of Warner Brothers and seeing the restrictions that were placed on Black women in film. And so my mom grew up with that, and those indignities kept my mother from ever wanting to pursue the arts. She was just fine without it. So in my sense, when I came around, I had that kind of mentorship. I had familial mentorship. Yet and still, the world is not fair, and it's not going to be fair. So other people outside of the family who recognize my perseverance, my attention to my dedication and attention to trying to strive for some sort of greatness, people like Dr. Leonard Bowie, who was one of the masterminds behind the Florida A&M University Marching 100. He recognized my talent at a young age. And just when someone does that, you're a kid, and they just say, you've got something there, don't quit. It's really meaningful. My current boss, who's the chairman of the music department at Florida A&M, he's not that much older than I am, but when I was coming around in high school, he recognized it, the same thing. He said, you've got something to say there. You're a fine musician. And most importantly, outside of the family, because that's still kind of the family, I met at a formative stage Maurice White, the founder of Earth, Wind & Fire, himself a great drummer who had played with Ramsey Lewis. And I just was so enamored with what they were doing in those years. And Maurice was easy for me to talk with. And he just said, listen, man, you are, this is where you belong. Just keep doing what you're doing. And so I'm very grateful for all of that. Those were people who were tremendously influential and helpful to me in my early stages. There's a question about, so the answer there is to be yourself, to keep working hard, to keep your feet on the ground, your head in the sky, and your heart in your hand. Coping through the pandemic. I referenced the Cuba Gooding Main Ingredient project. So the timing on the pandemic was right when I was getting to start to try to do some mixing on that. And my partner on the project producing it, we had to find all kinds of ways to work, with the latency issue when you're not in the same room, and quality of audio. That kept my attention. It was I don't want to get too religious sounding here, but it really was kind of my salvation early on when we were all just scared to death. I now know that I really dodged a couple of bullets. I went to the Super Bowl in January, and I went to Carnegie Hall to the one of the Gospel Music Awards in early February. Those were a large super spreader event. So, I'm really thankful that I'm around to talk about this now. Yeah. So what that time was, it was a time when I could say, no matter whatever else is going on, masking up and going to the store and washing your hands and everything. But at least I knew that I could be on that Zoom and have this thing called Listen To, this other app going, and I could be mixing a project. So I was diving deeply into the music. And I was also writing during that time as well. Any advice I'd like to give to the younger musicians? Yeah, absolutely. That's what I do all the time. I could think probably more than anything as we've emerged somewhat out of the pandemic, but then had to go back in and just, I think that looking out for the flock, looking out for each other, looking out for the students has been also extremely helpful to me. So I would say for the students during this strange time and for young people coming along, practice, practice, practice. Keep your ears wide open. I've got one of the most eclectic resumes one can have, from having been signed to Blue Note Records by Bruce Lundvall, and having Bruce mentor me, and having Bruce invite me over to have some of the finest young pianists around, as they were emerging. Remember once he had me come over and play for Benny Green. I want these young guys with this dazzling technique to hear you, Tookes, because you have something to say. You have an identity as a musician, as a singer, as a composer. I want my guys to know that. So my point of view for the young folks coming along, I can't imagine what it must be like to be the age people are now, where you're doing all the recording yourself, one at a time, and this kind of thing. So I would encourage people to find good collaborations, to know there's a lot of great talent out there. Integrity is imperative. And I'm sure I'm getting short on time, but that's how it is when you're having a good time. I'm going to mention, before I run out of time, that among the great partnerships I've had, like my relationship with Joe Beck, the records I did with him, and so many others, the one that defines me today is my relationship with Gil Goldstein. Gil orchestrated my most recent project, has not been released yet, but it's called Symphony of Love. And I met Gil through Brian McKenna, who at the time was representing people like Tia Fuller and Orrin Evans, and I got to work with Warren Wolf. I sang an Yvonne Lin song on Warren's record, and so I've met a lot of these young, fantastic talents. Yet and still, I had never worked with Gil before. And I worked with Gil on this. He orchestrated it. We recorded it. He had Louis Cato, multi-instrumentalist, playing on drums and the electric, but we had the Orchestra of St. Luke's. It's really a transformative project for us. And we're, looking for the right outlet for it. And we haven't found that just yet. But just like Ella said, if you keep following your heart and your truth, I really don't think you can go wrong. And that was someone who had a challenging life, a lot of things that were very difficult for her. But she said, with that joyful, youthful sound, I just think if you follow your heart and you just keep doing what you believe in, you keep your feet on the ground. And now I'm taking a little further back to Maurice and your head in the clouds, feet on the ground. I just don't think you can go wrong. I think you'll be okay. You'll have your bumps and you'll have all those rough spots that come along, but you'll be okay. And that's what I would tell the young folks. And I know I'm at 5:29 in seconds, so I don't want to go over. But as you can see, it's really hard to compress a 40-something year career in this amount of time. And I can tell you that my career is not just mine. It goes back to my mom's, my grandmother's. My grandmother sang with Al Jolson, for crying out loud. There's so much to talk about here. I'll close by saying thank you so much to Gail. Thank you to alternative venues. This is so important. When I had a hit record on the pop charts, Bobby Irving worked on that record with me. Danny Lee, God bless him, who passed away. But Bobby was working with Miles Davis at the time. Howard Levy played a harmonica solo. This is before Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. Chuck Lowe played on the record. God bless him. We're still here, and so many of our friends and heroes have passed on. And I do feel as though they're with us, and that's what continues to drive me. I am obligated to those fine people who supported me, who worked with me to keep up the fight and to keep trying to share the light wherever we can. So on that note, I'm at 5 minutes in. I'm at 5 o'clock and 31 minutes after. So I guess I got to say so long for now. But please let me know if you have any other questions. Pass them my way or through Ms. Gail Boyd, and I'll do my best to respond. Take care, everybody. Cheers.